Well, I'm Neven, and I'm going to tell you a little story. It's a little story about art. It's about a chipped knee. Michelangelo, who I'm sure everyone has heard of, got commissioned by Pope Julius II in 1505 to build the Pope's future tomb and 50 statues that would go in this tomb. This was a very complicated project, and there were all sorts of problems. The project suffered a number of setbacks along the way. The Pope and Michelangelo had quite different personalities. They didn't really, work together well. A war broke out at one point. Michelangelo had to leave Rome and then come back. After he came back, the Pope died, and then the Pope's family took over the project, and they changed the requirements for what the thing actually was. So 10 years into it, what he delivered was not 47 statues and a tomb. What he delivered was one single statue. And it's this statue. It's called the Moses. It's a single block of marble that was carved into Moses. When Michelangelo was done with it, he sort of looked at this thing that he had worked on for 10 years. Though during those 10 years, he took a little, side job. He painted the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel just along the way. He looked at Moses and grabbed his hammer and whacked the statue on the knee, damaging it in the process, and yelled out, "Speak." And the reason he yelled out, "Speak," was that just the sheer life of the statue had overwhelmed him. Even him, as the author, as the person who had been working on it for this long, he looked at it and it was just too much. He half expected it to actually talk to him. So full of life was it. Nobody had carved something like that. It's one of the greatest works of Western civilization, basically. So having said all of that, there's sort of an obvious question, I'm sure, in everyone's mind, which is, sure, but is it art? Laugh. It's a silly question. It's a ridiculous question, obviously. Nobody would seriously ask that. But in the year 2012, we hear some other sort of silly questions. For instance, you'll get something like this. Are games art? People are still debating this. Now, this may not be 100% pertinent to everyone in the crowd because not everyone here is making games. So let's put it this way. Are apps art? But to make it even, a little more generic, a little more clear, let's say some of you are working on things that are more like software services or suites of apps or something like that. Let's say, is software art? And having asked the question, I'm just going to answer it. I'm going to say, yes, it is. Hopefully somebody recognizes this. I'm comfortable saying, yes, it is. So then the next question is, all right, so what? What are we supposed to do with that? I think it's important. I think it's important to recognize that it is art. And I bet what you're thinking is, look, I'm trying to make an app. I want to make a to-do list app. I have to solve these hard problems. I have to make the app usable. I have to find ways to fund this. I have to find a way for this to actually earn me money, earn me a living at the end of it. I don't want to think also about making it art. That's what college was for. That's not what I want to think about now. But I'd like to just tell you a few short stories to sort of illustrate how it all comes together. When Michelangelo carved that block of marble, for good measure, he didn't use just any block of marble. He used a block of marble that was considered by other artists of that time to be unworkable, basically. It was unmalleable. It had a flaw in it, and you couldn't make a statue out of it. But Michelangelo had grown up in a family of stonecutters, and he knew marble. And he knew exactly what he had to do to actually carve this thing. And he managed to do so. And 5 centuries later, Moses is still there. He carved him and still standing, still going strong. So that's quite literally a hard problem that he had to solve. And he did solve it, just like you solve, software problems as you work. Here's another story, a bit of a pandering to the Australian audience here. Mad Max. Everyone has, either seen it or heard of it. Mad Max is the biggest shoestring budget success of all time, basically. The ratio of budget to earnings is just completely off the charts. And the budget was a shoestring budget. For instance, they only had one leather outfit for the whole movie where everyone wears leather. Everyone else wore goofy vinyl costumes, from the Halloween store. Mel Gibson is the only one who got a good one. It's set in a dystopian, dark, punk, sci-fi future. You know why? Because that's the cheapest future you can build. It just means you need a lot of banged up stuff, But, decades later, people still set movies in that future, mainly based on this movie, even when they can afford it, just because it sort of, it made sense. The director, George Miller, wanted to have a bunch of car chase scenes in the movie, and cars are expensive. So he ended up actually using his own personal car. He had this very cute little Mazda Bongo. Isn't that a cute little thing? But he had to use it in the movie. And actually, unfortunately, it was one of the cars that got destroyed. But hey, it was worth it. It was for his, creation. When I put this up earlier, I used the image of Miles Davis to illustrate the phrase, so what? The reason for that is that the phrase, so what, is sort of forever linked to Miles Davis because it's the title of the opening song on his album, Kind of Blue. The album, Kind of Blue, is the highest earning jazz album of all time. Now, wouldn't that be cool if you made something that was the highest earning something of all time in its category? And that is cool. That's really cool. But it's not like the thing. It's not the core of it. Because while these stories about, how much money Kind of Blue made and how Mad Max was shot and what sort of block of marble Michelangelo used, their stories are sort of interesting, but they're trivia. They're not what endures. They're not what we remember. We remember the music of Kind of Blue. And we remember like the visuals and the story and the acting of Mad Max. And we remember the final statue of the Moses because they make us react. Of all the definitions of art, I'm going to just focus on this one thing. It's a human creation that causes other humans to have this just outpouring of both emotional and intellectual reaction. They can't stop it. It's uncontrollable. It's unpredictable. They will just have it because the thing overwhelms them, like it did Michelangelo. What would that mean in the realm of software? I'll give you a few quick examples. Something like GarageBand for iPad. This takes what used to be like a building with a room and a lot of heavy, expensive equipment and a lot of trained people and puts it in a piece of glass that you carry in your messenger bag. That makes you feel basically like a little god, like you're carrying this impossible thing with you. You are like the most powerful person in the world. It can make you feel like the coolest person in the world because, for instance, Audion, Panic's MP3 player from 300 years ago, I think, something like that. Steve, who wrote it, was just saying recently when he was writing it, he had this thought, oh my God, I'm among like the 10 people in the world who can play MP3s on their computer. Like these virtual files that aren't stored on a thing of, magnetic tape or whatever. It can change the way that you see yourself. If you've ever used Everyday, it's an app where you take a picture of yourself every day or however often, and then it makes a little movie of it. If you have like a few months or years worth of this, and then you look back at it, it literally changes how you see yourself and think about yourself, and you sort of realize how others see you. That's a very powerful experience to have from a piece of software. It can transport you to another universe. This is Colossal Cave Adventure, or the thing that's sometimes just called Adventure, that gave, a name to adventure games. Just some white text on a black background, and you think that you're in another world. But, fiction, just books can take you to another world. But this gave you that world and then asked you to do things in it. I mean, that's how much you're in it. You have to actually find your way in it. You can't just flip to the next page. Software can change the way you see the actual world around you. If you've ever used WordLens, it's a translation app. It's like a camera that you hold up to a piece of writing, and then it literally changes it to your language of choice in the live camera feed. That, again, is giving you a new pair of eyes to look at the world with. Or in the case of this game by Terry Cavanaugh and his roommate, it's called Ihawai, that's how it's pronounced. It'll literally break your heart. And as far as emotional reactions go, it doesn't really get any heavier or deeper than that, I think. So that's what I mean by reaction. Michelangelo has to chip that knee and yell out, "Speak," played by Charlton Heston as always. Because he has to. It's simply compelling him to do so. Now, often where you hear the word art is sort of unfortunate because what people will do is once they've made something that's slightly offensive or incorrect or plain dumb, they will say, well, it's art. So, that doesn't count. And one thing to keep in mind is art can be good or bad. And bad art is not a good thing. Bad art is a bad thing. It's no better than no art. So, what you might ask at this point is, well, okay, sure, you think everything is art, good art or bad art. What's not art? Give me something that's not art. I'll show you an example of something that's not art. It's this. So this is a sign that's telling you that, the driveway is closed. And you know what it means if you know what a driveway is. I don't know what you call them here. The reason it's not art is that it's not doing anything other than what it's doing. It's not conveying or showing or evoking anything other than the fact that the driveway is closed. It's not rich enough, deep enough, powerful enough, lasting enough to really rank very highly on the art scale. It's just, this probably isn't art. I'll show you a piece of software that I think probably is art. This is Skype for Windows. So there's a lot of technology here. I mean, a lot of very smart people had to work very hard to make it possible. A lot of aesthetic choices were made along the way. There's a lot of stuff on the screen. They had to figure out, where does it go? What does it look like? What does it do? How does it interact with the other stuff that's there? And in the end, it creates a very rich human experience. You're talking to and seeing someone on the other end of the globe. That's powerful. But at the same time, I think it's a pretty crummy art in that it's kind of full of itself. Buzz Anderson often says of UI like that it insists on itself. All you want to see is this and then maybe this. Everything else really doesn't matter. Why would you want to see that? So a better art of the same thing, I think, would be something like this, FaceTime for iPad. We've probably all seen this. It does the same thing. The technology on the back end is probably as powerful. You get the same experience, but the aesthetic choices that were made along the way are much better ones. It's a better art. I would say it's generally a pretty good art. Now, you hear me say the word art so many times, you're thinking, well, I know artists. Those people are like full of themselves and like self-aggrandizing and like constantly talking about suffering and this and that. And that's a type of artist, but there's no need for you to be that because art can also be fun. You know, you don't have to be like John Keats or, you know, Emily Dickinson or Lord Byron. If you want to be them, that's awesome, but you don't have to. You can be this guy. This is Mr. William Wycherley. Mr. William Wycherley lived in the period of English history called Puritanism, which was chiefly sort of known for being incredibly boring. They basically banned fun for 20 years. The main entertainment / art, and those two often go together, at the time was the stage, the theater. And they basically stopped that. So for 20 years, it was really boring in England. And then people came out of that and started writing plays again. And he wrote this play called The Country Wife. It is known as basically the sort of dirtiest, lewdest, most kind of sex-obsessed English drama. The reason it's written that way is that that's what people craved at the time. They've just had 20 years of like black robes and, you know, Latin prayers. They needed to just party on, and that's what he gave them. So it was pretty successful at the time. But then what happened was for the next 3 centuries, nobody put it on stage because people would talk about it and they would say, well, yeah, you know, remember that thing? That was pretty cute, but we're not going to like actually put that on stage anymore. And then sometime in the mid 20th century, people dug it up and they're like, hey, you know what? There's actually really good like social satire here. It says really cool things about like, you know, social status and classes and relationships between men and women and sort of openness and honesty in human interactions. And the language is really quite clever. So then they started producing it again. And today it's basically part of the permanent repertoire of one theater or another. It's always being performed somewhere. It's been made into a Broadway musical. You can see it today. What I like about this is that after 3 centuries, we've dug up what used to be sort of just this ridiculous juvenile kind of comedy, and it's being put on again because it says a lot about the human experience. We don't watch it for the dumb jokes anymore. I mean, people still laugh, but there's more to it than that. So even this sort of very base kind of work of art has still endured. Now, if you thought of a software equivalent to this, this is sort of the most obvious one. It's the Leisure Suit Larry series of games. They're similarly kind of really teenage in their like obsession with sex and like corny jokes and whatnot. The problem with that is, well, it's not a great game, really. I mean, people still remember it just for being silly, but it's not an awesome game. And it's really just a piece of silly fiction. Like there's not much software to it. What I think is a better example is, if you've ever taken a CS class, you probably recognize this, ELIZA. Or to be more specific, it's the doctor module of the ELIZA language processing script. It's one of those things where you talk to the computer and you say something and the computer basically parrots your words back to you, you know, formed as a question. And so you can have a conversation where you say something like, oh, my mom wants me to go to Stanford. And it goes, oh, really? Your mom wants you to go to Stanford? And you say, yeah, I know, I feel so trapped. Oh, really? I'm sorry to hear that you feel so trapped. And it just goes on forever like that. Did you know that this was originally developed as a joke, basically, as like a parody of psychotherapy? The guy who developed it, Joseph Wiesenbaum, he did it this way because it's incredibly simple. he didn't have to put any real world knowledge into the app. All he had to do was just give it this pattern that would just basically give you your words back framed as a question. He was actually upset that people would sit down and have long conversations with this thing. He would sort of shake them and go, no, it's just a dumb program. And he would ask them to see the transcript so he could debug it. And they would go, no, I said private things in there. Like, no, you don't get to see that. This really upset him. I mean, he died recently, but, to his dying day, he was still going around saying, you people are crazy. You're talking to, 800 lines of code. But so he couldn't predict what it would actually do, but what it did was still really powerful. People made a connection with it, and people felt things, and they felt like they'd gotten something off their chest. He made people feel, which is really, really powerful, whether you plan it or not. So back to Moses and how it made Michelangelo feel, there was another 20th century figure, sort of a big figure of 20th century Western civilization, who was obsessed with this statue, and it was Sigmund Freud, who for a while he lived in Rome, would go and visit the statue every day and sort of sit in front of it, look up at it, and ponder himself pondering it, and think both, why is this thing so amazing, and also why am I so amazed by it? What is it that draws me to it? The way he phrased it was, no piece of statuary has ever made a stronger impression on me than this. Some turn of mind in me rebels against being moved by a thing without knowing why I'm thus affected and what it is that affects me. Again, speaking to this thing of, I don't even understand why I'm having this reaction to it. I just know that I can't fight it. I'm having it. By the way, this is the App Store review that you should get for your app, if you can, by Super Ego Dude 212. Having said all of that, how do you do it? I mean, what does it mean? I mean, you've got an app. How do you make it a piece of art? The best advice I can give you is just do what you're doing today. I mean, make software the way you make software. You don't have to change anything. Just in the process of doing so, keep an eye out for this. Keep an eye out for moments that I call high-fiving the universe. And when universe high-fives you, you high-five it back. What I mean by that is look for moments where the software seems to do more than you told it to. This for me is the most magical thing in software development. You compile and run, and it does what you wanted it to do, and yet it still feels surprising. You're still like, oh my God, this thing is doing this thing. After that, there's the next step where it actually surprises you. It's actually like, I didn't even know it would do that. I mean, I just fed it enough behavior and stuff that it did something that I couldn't have even predicted. When you watch other people using it, if they have a strong emotional reaction to it, hold on to that. That's really important. Try to do what you can to maximize those and expand on those, and try not to do anything that would minimize them. The main reason why I say that is that fashions and trends come and go. People's practical needs come and go. Maybe we won't need to-do list apps, 10 years from now. Maybe something will replace that. But human feelings and reactions to things will go on pretty much unchanged as long as we are humans. And that's pretty cool if you can speak to that, if you can address that, if you can get that out of people. And that's all I have to say about how to make art. Thank you.